It began on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that slips by unnoticed. The sky was clear, the air warm with the last hint of spring, and inside the Oliver home, everything seemed ordinary. Sandra Oliver typed rapidly on her laptop at the kitchen table, headphones in, half a sandwich forgotten beside her. James had just texted he'd be late, again. Their usual babysitter had moved out of state for college, and with a last-minute project and an out-of-town client dinner on the horizon, they needed help, fast. So when Clarissa arrived right on time, it felt like a stroke of luck. She was everything a parent would hope for. Mid-30s, dressed neatly in soft pastels, a calming presence wrapped in a smile. Her references checked out. A clean background, even a glowing recommendation from the school counselor. She brought her own book, offered to tidy up. "My mom raised me to leave a place better than I found it," she said warmly, placing her purse gently on the kitchen counter. Ellie, their 5-year-old, looked up from her crayons with quiet curiosity. Tommy, just 2, clutched his stuffed dinosaur and toddled behind. And then there was Murphy. Murphy was more than a family dog. He was a 10-year-old German Shepherd, once the pride of the Oakwood Police Department, a retired K-9 officer trained to detect narcotics, track suspects, and even defend officers under fire. These days he had a little stiffness in the hips and a gray muzzle, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a soldier. He was quiet, loyal, and never wrong. Until that day, Murphy hadn't growled in months, but the moment Clarissa stepped into the house, Murphy stood, his hackles raised. A low, guttural growl vibrated from his chest. He positioned himself between Clarissa and the children with silent certainty. James chuckled nervously. "He's old school. Probably just doesn't like strangers." Clarissa offered a polite laugh, lifting both hands in a gentle shrug. "Maybe I smell like a cat," she joked. But Murphy didn't relax. When she reached for Ellie's coloring book, Murphy took a step forward, just one, and stood rigid, ears pinned back, gaze locked. Ellie instinctively clung to his fur. Sandra crouched beside him, her voice soft. "It's okay, Murph. She's here to help." He didn't move. The room filled with the kind of tension no one wanted to name. Because when a trained dog reacts like that, when instinct, honed by years of life or death situations, speaks up, it's no small thing. But life goes on. People make excuses, rationalize discomfort, dismiss warnings as quirks. That evening, Clarissa sat quietly on the couch, flipping pages in her book while the children played nearby. But Murphy didn't rest. He stayed between them and her, watching, listening, waiting. No one knew it then, not yet. But the danger wasn't coming. It had already walked through their front door, and Murphy was the only one who saw it. The next 2 days passed in a strange sort of silence, one that buzzed beneath the surface of ordinary sounds. The clink of juice glasses, the crinkle of coloring paper, even the low hum of the dishwasher. But always, beneath it all, there was Murphy's growl. He never barked without cause. Not once in the Oliver's memory had he sounded an alarm just for the sake of it. But now, his presence in the house had changed. He no longer followed the children playfully. Instead, he stationed himself between the couch and the hallway, near the kids when they colored, in the corner of the kitchen whenever Clarissa moved. Sandra tried not to overthink it. Maybe Murphy was having an off week. He was aging after all. Maybe his joints hurt more than usual. Maybe the change in routine, the presence of a new person, was enough to trigger his instincts. But still, she couldn't quite shake the feeling. And when she caught James looking at her with that same quiet concern, she knew he felt it too. Clarissa, for her part, seemed unbothered. She smiled often, read her book quietly, and kept to herself unless asked to engage. She played with the kids when prompted, and always offered to clean up. "I don't want to be in your way," she'd say, folding dish towels or wiping the counters. She was too helpful, Sandra thought once, then felt guilty for thinking it. But Murphy didn't feel guilty. He didn't back down. On Thursday afternoon, the tension snapped. Sandra was on a Zoom call in the upstairs bedroom, headphones in, eyes focused on quarterly reports, when it happened. First came the bark, sharp and explosive, the kind that rattled the window panes. Then came the crash of something breaking. She yanked off the headset and ran. Downstairs, the scene looked like a moment frozen mid-storm. Clarissa stood near the kitchen island, pressed against the wall, eyes wide with something like panic. Murphy was between her and the counter, barking relentlessly. A ceramic vase lay shattered on the floor. "He's crazy," Clarissa cried. "He just lunged at me." Murphy's eyes were fixed, not on Clarissa, but on her purse, which had tipped over and spilled onto the floor. His nose hovered an inch above it, ears forward, body tight like a loaded spring. "Enough, Murph," Sandra shouted, grabbing his collar and trying to pull him back. But Murphy didn't move. Instead, he let out another furious bark and nudged the purse with his snout. Something small clattered out. It landed with a soft tap. A syringe. Time stopped. Clarissa froze. Sandra stared, confused. What is that?" Clarissa swallowed hard. I'm diabetic. That's insulin." Sandra blinked. "But why was it under your wallet?" She didn't get a chance to respond. James had just walked in the front door. His eyes darted to the floor, then to Clarissa. "Insulin?" he said flatly. "You didn't mention diabetes." "I forgot," Clarissa said quickly. Too quickly. It's just, I need to go." She grabbed her bag, scooped the remaining contents off the floor in a single motion, and pushed past them. Out the door. Gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Murphy finally stopped barking, but his body remained stiff, his stare fixed on the closed door. Sandra turned to James. "Did that feel wrong to you?" He nodded slowly. "All of it." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, and the house had settled into uneasy quiet, Sandra remembered something. The Nest camera in the living room. She'd forgotten they even had it, installed a year ago and rarely checked. She opened her laptop. The footage was grainy but clear. At one point during the afternoon, Clarissa could be seen walking toward the kitchen. She opened the fridge, pulled out a juice bottle, and placed it on the counter. Then, almost casually, she reached into her purse. Her body turned slightly, blocking the view. 3 seconds passed. Then she moved again. Murphy had barked just after. Sandra leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. "James," he sat beside. Her eyes on the screen. They replayed it, watched the slight movement. The hand dipping into the purse, the obscured countertop, the timing. The break. "She was putting something in their drinks," Sandra said quietly. James didn't respond. He didn't have to. Upstairs, the kids slept soundly. Ellie's nightlight glowed from beneath the door. Murphy lay curled just outside their room, his eyes half closed, but alert, always alert. And suddenly Sandra understood what had been wrong. All along. Murphy hadn't been growling at a stranger. He'd been warning them about a threat, and they had almost missed it. The following morning, there was no pretending anymore. Murphy paced the hallway like he was back on duty, sniffing at corners, occasionally letting out a low whine when he stopped at the children's door. Ellie, now growing wary of questions and hushed voices, clung to him like a blanket. Tommy followed him room to room, mimicking his steps. The house felt different, like something unseen had cracked open and couldn't be sealed again. James called off work. Sandra emailed her boss, citing a family emergency. Neither of them could articulate exactly what they feared, but the image of that syringe haunted them both. By noon, they sat at the kitchen table in silence, the laptop open between them, replaying. The Nest footage frame by frame. There she was, Clarissa, cheerful, humming under her breath. She adjusted a pillow, opened the fridge, took out juice. Then came the critical moment. She leaned toward the counter. Her body blocked the camera for precisely 3 seconds. When she straightened, her hands were empty. Sandra's stomach turned. There's something in her left hand. Before she Turns. Zoom in, James said. It'll get blurry. I don't care. She did. The image distorted, but the shape was clear enough. Thin, cylindrical metallic tip. The syringe. She dropped it because of Murphy, Sandra whispered. And if he hadn't barked when he did, James didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They knew what it meant. By 3:00 p.m., James was sitting across from Deputy Marshall at the county sheriff's office, footage in hand, the syringe sealed in a Ziploc bag. Marshall, a no-nonsense man in his early 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, watched the video in silence. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. German Shepherd, you said? Murphy, retired K-9 from Oakwood PD. Marshall tapped the screen. There's something you should... No. That babysitter, Clarissa, she's not who she says she is. James blinked. Excuse me? We've been tracking a woman named Karen Russo. Multiple aliases. Been moving through 3 states. We haven't had enough to charge her with anything. Concrete. Until now. But we've heard the same kinds of stories. Kids getting sick, pets reacting violently. Surveillance footage missing or corrupted. James felt his pulse quicken. So she's done this before. Marshall nodded slowly. We don't know what she's putting in the drinks yet, but your footage, and your dog, might have just handed us the thread we need to unravel the whole thing. Back at home, Sandra had taken the kids into the backyard for a makeshift picnic. Murphy sat between Ellie and Tommy, his body tense, eyes scanning the tree line. Every time Ellie reached for a juice box or sandwich, Murphy sniffed it first. Sandra didn't stop him. In fact, she waited for his silent approval. Later that evening, Marshall arrived at the house with another officer. They asked Sandra to replay the footage again. They collected the syringe, took notes on every odd moment since Clarissa first walked in the door, especially Murphy's behavior. This footage, Marshall said, is exactly what we've been missing. We'll run it through state records, cross-reference fingerprints. It might be the break we've needed. That night, local news picked up the story. Mysterious babysitter under investigation. Retired K-9 may have saved family. A neighbor texted Sandra a link to the report before she'd even seen it. James watched the segment with disbelief. We just wanted someone to watch the kids for a few hours. Murphy remained curled by the bedroom door, eyes open, body still alert. Didn't care about news stories. He was still on the job. 2 days later, the phone rang. Officer Marshall again. We got a match, he said. Sandra stood in the living room, phone pressed tight to her ear. Tell me. The fingerprint on the syringe is linked to a case, out of Arizona. A little boy fell into a coma. Parents suspected foul play but had no proof. Babysitter disappeared the next day. Used a different name then, Melanie DuPont. Same woman, same look. Sandra's knees nearly gave out. What? Happens now? We've issued a warrant. State police are looking. And Sandra, your dog is a hero. The news spread fast. Reporters began calling. Some asked for interviews. One offered money for exclusive access to the nest footage. James and Sandra declined them all. They weren't ready for the media circus. Instead, they gave Murphy something better. On Friday, they brought him to Ellie's school for show and tell. Ellie had begged. Please, Mom, can I bring Murphy? Everyone brings stickers. No one has a hero dog. Murphy wore a blue bandana with a paw print badge. K-9, retired but ready. Ellie stood in front of her class, chin high, voice steady. This is Murphy. He used to be a police dog, and he saved me and my brother from a very bad person. The teacher wiped her eyes. Parents clapped. Murphy barked once like a salute. That weekend, the doorbell rang. Officer Marshall stood on the porch with a plaque. Murphy, for loyalty, instinct, and the protection of the innocent, it read. We don't give these out often, he said. But your boy earned it. James knelt beside Murphy and rubbed behind his ears. You're not just our dog, you're family. But the moment that stayed with Sandra most wasn't public. It happened late Sunday night. She stepped into the darkened living room to turn off the lights. Murphy sat facing the front door, still, silent, watching. She sat beside him, rested her hand on his back. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Murphy let out a long sigh and lowered his head onto her lap. The world outside remained uncertain, but inside that house, for one brief moment, there was peace. The relief didn't last long. 3 days after Murphy received his commendation plaque, Sandra found something on the porch that made her blood run cold. A small brown package. No return address, no postage, just a box, sitting there like it had always belonged. She hesitated before touching it. Instinct. Fear. She called James to the door. He hadn't ordered anything. Neither had she. Murphy approached, sniffed the air, then let out a clipped bark. His body stiffened. James stepped back inside, already dialing Officer Marshall. Within the hour, a cruiser pulled up. Marshall arrived, in gloves and with a look that said he was tired of surprises. He examined the box, no ticking, no wires. But Murphy didn't relax. That, more than anything, made Sandra nervous. Carefully, Marshall opened it with a utility knife. Inside was a stack of children's books, neatly wrapped. On top, a sticky note in large, blocky handwriting. For Ellie and Tommy. Thought they'd enjoy the stories. See, Sandra's knees buckled. Marshall cursed under his breath. "She's taunting you," he muttered. "Testing. How close she can get." James clenched his fists. "She dropped this off herself, didn't she?" "Probably within the last 2 hours," Marshall said grimly. "She wants you to know she can." The books were taken for evidence, scanned, bagged. Murphy sniffed them obsessively and gave a low growl each time someone touched them. "She knows where we live," Sandra whispered. "She already did," Marshall replied. "Now she wants you to feel it." That night, they moved the kids to Sandra's sister's house. Ellie cried when she had to sleep somewhere new. "Can Murphy come?" she asked, hugging his neck. "He has to protect the house, sweetheart," Sandra said softly, but Murphy didn't. Zist. He stood tall at the door, watching the car disappear, then returned to his post by the window like a soldier left behind. James and Sandra barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made them jump. Murphy never left the front room. He stood guard, eyes sharp, every muscle taut with purpose. 3 nights later, it escalated. At 2:14 a.m., the doorbell rang. Sandra shot upright in bed. James was already reaching for his phone. Murphy had beaten them both, barking furiously at the door. James pulled up the security feed. A figure stood just out of view. Only a sliver of shoulder and hair was visible before the figure turned and vanished into the dark. By the time police arrived, there was no trace, except for one thing taped to the mailbox: a child's drawing, crayons on construction paper. A woman with a ponytail standing over 2 stick-figure children. Beside them, a black dog with red X's over its eyes. Sandra's hands trembled. James punched the doorframe so hard the wood cracked. Murphy sniffed the drawing, then turned his back to it stiff as iron. "She's not just watching us," Sandra whispered. "She's planning something." The next morning, things got stranger. Murphy began sniffing every vent in the house. Kitchen, living room, bedroom. He stopped at one, by the pantry, and barked once, sharp and focused. James unscrewed the grate, expecting a mouse or a toy. What he found was a microphone, a tiny black device barely visible embedded in dust and shadows. Sandra gasped. "She bugged our house?" They realized, sickened, that Clarissa, or Karen Russo, or whoever she truly was, must have planted it weeks ago. During that first visit, when Sandra gave her the grand tour while the kids napped. "She's been listening," Marshall confirmed. Later that afternoon. The entire time, the FBI insisted the Olivers relocate, a secure house nearby under protection. Sandra and the kids would stay hidden. James would return during the day to monitor the property, with Murphy at his side. The first afternoon, Murphy walked the house in wide circles. He sniffed every door frame, every window, then finally lay down by the front window, watching, listening. And just after sunset, he growled again. James checked the live feeds. There, in the alley behind the house, a figure, a woman, standing still, staring. In her hand, a stuffed animal. Murphy barked so violently James feared he'd break the glass. He hit the panic alarm. By the time sirens arrived, she was gone. The toy remained, a plush raccoon. Identical to Ellie's bedtime favorite. Sandra broke down when she saw it. Murphy stood over it until it was taken away by evidence techs. He didn't rest that night. He paced, whined, barked at shadows, and then came the note. It was slid under the back mudroom door sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. Murphy found it first. Standing over it like a sentry, James used tweezers to pick it up. "You can keep hiding them," the note read in crooked handwriting. "But I always finish what I start." The writing matched the sticky note from the books. Matched the drawing. Taped to the mailbox, Sandra gripped the kitchen table until her knuckles turned white. "She's escalating," James said. "She's not just threatening anymore, she's hunting." Murphy hadn't slept in days. But it wasn't exhaustion. It was vigilance. At dawn, he sat beneath the window, posture straight, eyes forward. Not resting, not afraid. Waiting for her. The plan was risky, but it was the only way. Agent Danvers, a seasoned FBI field agent with a quiet voice and the eyes of someone who'd seen too much, laid it out carefully. "She watches before she acts. That's her pattern. We use it against her." Sandra sat at the edge of her seat, arms crossed tight across her chest. "How?" Danvers met her gaze. "We leak false information. Make her believe the kids are coming back. For just one night. Then we wait." Murphy, sitting silently in the corner, lifted his head. They moved fast. The Olivers' home was rewired from top to bottom. Cameras in every room, hidden microphones, infrared detectors at every entry point. From the outside, it looked like life had returned to normal. Toys were scattered across the lawn. Ellie's tricycle leaned near the porch. Tommy's lunchbox sat half open on the steps. Upstairs, a light flickered on in the children's bedroom every evening at 8 hours sharp. But the house was empty, except for James, Agent Danvers, 2 more agents in plain clothes, and Murphy. Sandra and the kids had been relocated to a secure facility hours north. They FaceTimed every evening. Ellie waved to Murphy through the screen, blowing kisses. He watched quietly, tail still, posture alert. Even in silence, he seemed to understand the mission. The trap was set. Every night, Murphy sat beneath the slightly cracked upstairs window, a deliberate vulnerability left in place to bait Clarissa. James kept a tranquilizer gun nearby, loaded and ready. It wasn't lethal, but strong enough to drop someone fast. They waited. Monday. Nothing. Tuesday. A false alarm. Just a stray raccoon. Murphy didn't even blink. Wednesday. A delivery. Truck parked too long but drove off. By Friday, nerves were raw. Then at 2:33 a.m. it happened. A soft click. One of the backyard motion sensors tripped, just for a second. Murphy stood up instantly. Danvers' voice came through the earpiece. "Movement. Rear garage. She's here." James held his breath. He could hear his own pulse. Infrared picked up the figure, hooded, small, agile. Moving low, like she'd done this before. She crept along the edge of the fence, paused by the side door. Waited. Then she moved to the open upstairs window. She climbed slowly, deliberately, her frame sliding through the crack. That was her mistake. Murphy lunged. The takedown was fast and fierce. She screamed, a short, sharp sound, then went silent as Murphy clamped onto her arm. Not hard enough to maim, just enough to stop her. She kicked, thrashed. Murphy didn't let go. Flashlights exploded in the dark. Shouts filled the house. "FBI. Don't move." Clarissa froze. Within seconds, she was cuffed, dragged to her feet. Her face was pale, wild-eyed, twisted into something inhuman. She said nothing as they led her outside. James collapsed onto the hallway wall, hands shaking. Murphy sat beside him, chest heaving, tail still, watching the door. It was over. The next morning, News stations across the country lit up with the headline, "Notorious Babysitter Suspect Captured in Undercover Sting Led by Retired K9." Social media exploded. Murphy was hailed as a hero. Former police colleagues sent letters. The mayor's office called. But none of that mattered. Not until Sandra returned home and saw Clarissa's mugshot on the news. "She's really gone," she whispered. Ellie ran to Murphy, throwing her arms around his neck. "You did it!" Murphy wagged his tail once, just once. That weekend, they slept with the windows unlocked for the first time in months. Murphy curled up by the fireplace, paws crossed. Tommy left, his plush raccoon beside him. The air in the house felt lighter. James poured coffee Sunday morning, sitting beside Sandra on the back porch. "Do you think she would have hurt them?" Sandra stared out at the yard. "I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if Murphy hadn't barked that first time." James looked inside through the screen door. Murphy was asleep. In the hallway, not twitching, not growling, just resting. "I guess there's one lesson in all this," he said quietly. Sandra raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "Sometimes the best judge of character doesn't say a word." Later that afternoon, a letter arrived, official and sealed with gold foil. James opened it slowly. "It's from the governor's office," he said. "Not for us. For him." Murphy had been selected to receive the Medal of Civilian Valor. Only the second dog in the state's history to be honored. Ellie dropped her spoon. "Murphy's going to be famous." The ceremony was held on the Capitol steps. A red carpet, a small stage, reporters, local families, officers. Murphy wore a new K9 vest, a special tag on his collar. Protector, partner, hero. The governor took the podium. "In a world where we often second-guess our instincts," he said, "this dog reminds us that some voices don't need words to be heard." He bent down and clipped the medal onto Murphy's vest. The crowd cheered. Murphy didn't bark, he didn't flinch. He simply sat tall, eyes forward, steady, watchful, always watching. 3 weeks after Clarissa's arrest, the Oliver family finally returned to something resembling peace. No more patrol cars parked on the street. No more unexpected packages or midnight doorbells. The shadows that had haunted every corner of their home had begun to lift. But some habits died harder than others. Sandra still checked every lock at night, twice. James still paused every time an unfamiliar car slowed outside. And Murphy, even in the calm, never truly let his guard down. But he did sleep. For the first time in months, Murphy slept soundly beside the fireplace, his body stretched out in soft, steady rhythm. The kind of rest that only comes when a job is finally, truly done. One Tuesday morning, a package arrived. This one expected, this one celebrated. It was the medal from the state capitol, now mounted on a small wooden plaque engraved with 3 simple words: protector, partner, hero. Sandra placed it above the fireplace next to a photo of Murphy standing between Ellie and Tommy, his eyes locked on the camera like he knew something no one else did. James started a blog, almost on a whim. He called it Murphy Knows, a place to share their story, offer tips to parents, highlight red flags, and remind families that sometimes the warning signs come with 4 legs and a tail. To their surprise, the blog grew. Thousands of parents wrote in. Some shared stories of their own. Pets refusing to leave a child's side, growling at a visitor who seemed fine, barking at doors just seconds before someone knocked. Others simply said, "Thank you. Thank you for listening, for trusting." The instincts we so often dismiss. Murphy became more than a family pet. He became a symbol. Ellie returned to school, where her classmates treated her like a celebrity. During career week, she brought Murphy in again, this time with his medal. Her teacher smiled through tears as Ellie declared, "This is my dog. He stopped a villain." And that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and fireflies danced, across the lawn, Sandra sat on the porch with Murphy curled at her feet. She looked down at him and whispered, "You gave us more than safety. You gave us time." Murphy shifted slightly, resting his head on her foot. Sometimes the clearest warnings don't come in words. They come in a look, a low growl, a feeling in your gut. And sometimes, the quietest voice is the one that saves everything. So here's the question. If someone or something you trusted tried to tell you something was wrong, would you listen, or would you brush it off as nothing more than a bark? Because in the Oliver family, that bark changed everything, and somewhere out there, someone else might be listening too. Because this story, it isn't over yet.